Welcome everyone to the Reinventing You podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Sulli, and this is the space where when you feel lost, stuck, unfulfilled, and you want to reinvent a part of your life, or you're just looking for guidance and direction, this is the space to come. Our guests on this show are those who have reinvented their lives. These are people who have overcome the odds and the challenges that life has thrown at them, and they have gotten to the other side, and they share their stories. So one, you know you're not alone, but two, so that you have some strategies and tools that you can take with you to help you create the changes that you want in your life. I am so excited for our guest today. With the pandemic, with 2020, 2021, a lot of us have experienced a different level of illness and death and just experiences in life that we may not have normally been exposed to, or not to the level that we have. And this guest is going to help us and guide us and show us something that I don't think many people have the opportunity to teach and share. So I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest today. Her name is Peggy Green. She is a mother, teacher, survivor, and leader who has overcome the odds. This Amazon bestselling author has withstood the loss of not just one child, but two. Her mission is to make an impact and help others grieving the loss of their child. Her book, Life After a Child Loss, The Mother's Survival Guide to Cope and Find Joy, alongside her Thursday Thoughts publication, supports hundreds of readers in their journey of grief. Peggy is the living example of the possibilities of life after losing your child. Her passion to share her personal experiences has brought her to develop the Grief Survival Program, where she helps grieving moms move through their loss. The challenges she has overcome and openly shares, and the realistic and applicable practices she teaches, not only serve to help others healing from the loss of their child, but in grieving any death one may be faced with. Thank you so much, Peggy, for joining us today. I appreciate your time and the opportunity to hear your story and everything that you've overcome.
Well, Alyssa, thank you so much for having me. And what a wonderful introduction. I'm super excited to be here. And I'm just blessed to be here and hoping that my message reaches those who really need it today.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. On this show, we love to hear the stories of overcoming life's challenges, and to say that you have had to overcome not one but two unfortunate passing of your children. I would love to be able to understand that journey that you've gone through and how you worked through the transition of being a mother to losing children, and just sharing your story along the way. I'd love to hear it and have others know what you did to get through it.
Yeah. So, Alyssa, I'm a mom, and also a grieving mom. I've had 4 children, and it's been quite the journey, and the tools and resources that I've accumulated and amassed over the years has helped me to be able to walk through this journey and to have the hope, and having the mindset to be able to do this has been so very extraordinary. I feel that now I have a message to share with others, and that when I went through my first loss, that's been 30 years ago, and I felt like back then I didn't have the tools and resources. I felt alone, and I felt like there was nothing really out there to help me. And somehow I managed to make it through it. And then when I was hit with it a second time, I had amassed these tools, and I was like, God never gives me, He doesn't give us our losses, but He gives us the tools and the experience to be able to make it through these. So when I really thought about it and had to face this second loss, I tapped into those resources that I had been acquiring over the past 30 years.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. So can you share a little bit about, that's quite a gap, 30-year gap from losing one child to another. So you had 4 children in total, and you have 4 children. Can you share with us a little bit of what maybe transpired to a degree, and how you worked through the first one, and then what you used to support you in the second?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one, I felt really like I was on my own in the way I didn't feel like I had the support, especially from my husband at the time. And I really tapped into just kind of just trying to make it through it on a daily basis. I had the support of my mom and my sister, but that was really it. I didn't have a method or tools and resources really to do it. I did continue some journaling, which I've done throughout my years, and I was able to express my thoughts, but I'm not sure if I ever really was able to process that entire loss. And then in between all that time, I've experienced a multitude of other losses, both my parents, a sister, nieces, nephews, cousins, and other life experiences that have helped me to develop tools and resources, and realizing journaling is a piece of that, but also having that tribe to support me. So this time I really reached out to my tribe, to close friends who could actually support me in going through this. I
Yeah.
also realized, just the importance of doing some simple things like exercise, and how exercise has such an impact on our physiology and, the way we think about things. So
Mm.
I brought together also how I thought about things. And then with the loss of my second child, that means I had two beautiful grown girls, and that I had a purpose to be alive and active and be present for them.
Mm. So what happened with it, if you don't mind sharing, what happened with your first child? How old was your first child's when they passed, and then the second?
Yeah, absolutely. And so they're two very different ones. My 9-month-old was at an in-home daycare, and it was an accident at the in-home daycare. And then 28 years later, my 24-year-old son took his life. And so two very distinct um, situations and circumstances. And I've honestly found it more difficult with my son. And I think it's part of that's because he was around for 24 years.
Mm.
Also, you know, that there was a deeper relationship, and he's gone. There's no more. I mean, I always loved my first child. I love Courtney. But we also had planned to have other children. So even though I've lost two, they're just two very different ways that I've dealt with it, and emotions, because of where I was in life circumstances. So it's been dramatically different.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting about the different ways that they've passed is that, my first thought was, an in-home daycare, and they were in someone else's hands. And my first thought was my anger I would feel towards them. And then my second thought was the guilt I would feel towards myself. So, and I can only imagine it, the second one is there's a degree of guilt, but it's just this, I feel like it's like this frustration I feel like I would feel towards my son, because I just want him to know how much I loved him. So can you talk me through, like, the first one, if I'm a mother who lost a child, a young child, in someone else's hands, how do you work through that? Like, what was your thought process, and how did you shift maybe your belief system around, and then what did you do with your other children? Did you trust other people to care for them after that? How did that work?
And those are some really deep questions here, Alyssa, and I'm happy to share with you on that. It was an in-home daycare, and to touch up a little bit of the circumstances, I was working a job where I had irregular hours, that I would possibly start at 6 a.m. and not get off until 4 or 5 p.m., or I'd
Mm.
start at 2 in the afternoon and get off at 10, 11, 12 a.m. And my husband at the time was traveling for his job. And I didn't have resources for a traditional daycare, a 9 to 5 type of thing, because it just didn't fit in. And so this woman took our daughter in, took Courtney in her hands. She was like a grandmother, and I know that she loved all the children that she was taking care of, and that it was all through her heart. And it's difficult to absorb that it was an accident, that she didn't baby proof her home. But I also knew that if I did not forgive her, that I would eat myself up with anger and guilt, like you said. And when I forgave her, it wasn't so much for her benefit, but it was for mine. And I had to be able to give that up. And it was biblical. I can't remember the passage that I read one day and just said, that's what I need to do for my own mental health and well-being. And so that's what I did, is to be able to forgive her. I couldn't feel guilty because we made the decisions on where we were at that time in that place in working. And that was the choices that I had. Then regarding my son, he was 24, and there were no signs that he'd really shared that life was desperate for him. And it came to that point, and I talked to him, I think it was 4 days before he took his life, and he was happy and joyful. And it happened actually just 2 weeks before Christmas. And just moving into those holidays and learning how to process that. But he was 24. And one of the things we have learned through the years, I've had 2 children also go through drug addiction programs. And in those programs, there's a few things that have been instrumental for me. One is the 3 C's: didn't cause, can't cure, and can't control. And those 3 C's really helped me to associate that with Connor and his decision. That decision was his. I didn't have him make it. He didn't consult me on that decision. I also think that it wasn't planned. I think that it was in the moment when the desperation hit and that it was so difficult. And because of that, I have not taken on the responsibility for that. It's easy for someone to do that, but I've chosen not to, because he made that decision. And with that, I've also said, even though my heart still breaks, that with that decision, I can't allow that to dictate how I feel the rest of my life. But what it did is inspired me to help other moms in their grief. That message came through loud and clear in how to help other moms. Is it's not going to, his choice has been difficult, and I don't take on the guilt for it. And I still grieve him. I still miss him, and I still love him.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that and for being so open and honest about, your perspective and your mindset. And, what I hear, one of the key things I hear is that, one, through forgiveness, it releases the burden and pain that you carry of something you can't change. And it's not accepting what is as if I'm okay with it, as much as is letting go and releasing this part of what can't be changed. And you took responsibility. You took ownership of where you were at in your life, and you had set up the scenario and situations. And she may not have baby proofed her home, which was a contributing factor that led to Courtney's death. But ultimately, that I made the choice to work, my husband made the choice to work, and in this dynamic, we put, our daughter in this situation, and you took that responsibility. And the strength that comes from that, and the awareness that it's just an amazing piece to what you spoke to, because that I could see where we think it's easy to go to blame and judgment and carry that, versus heal ourselves and own what we can and learn from the mistake and just do it differently next time, which my guess is with your other two daughters and your son, you had them in different situations for childcare.
Actually, because of that, I became a stay-at-home mom.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, absolutely. And it changed our perspective as a family unit. Their dad and myself with the other three children. Yeah, I was a stay-at-home mom,
Yeah.
which was very satisfying and gratifying.
Yeah.
So it did change the dynamics, and to give a new appreciation for life, that it's fragile and that it's temporary and that anything can happen at any moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and with your son's death, I was inspired by, I can't take responsibility for the choice he made. Like, it makes me emotional just because I know, like, as a mom, I have two girls, like, oh, just the beauty in that, and the lessons, and having your other children in drug rehab, and these different scenarios that almost are like, here's some tools for Peggy, because life's going to keep presenting challenges, as for everybody. Peggy is not alone. You're not alone in whatever you're going through. Like, we all have hurdles and obstacles that's life's presenting us, tools and resources. And it's like you took them in and you recognize, okay, I'm now in this situation. What have I learned in my life to keep stepping forward? You spoke to, you have other children, like, even, with your with your son's death, you're like, I have two more daughters. Like, I can't just give up. And it's like that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it became another source of purpose for you to not only support women and others who have lost children, but to recognize that I have a greater purpose and that I'm still a mom, and that hasn't changed because he chose to make the decision he made, even though that was, he was in pain.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the other things that have really helped me in understanding partially the method of loss is that in working with a chaplain, that he shared that whatever demons were sitting on Connor's shoulder are gone. They're no longer there. And that's one reason that somebody chooses to take their life, because there are demons that sit on their shoulders.
Yeah.
The other piece, woo, you're taking me to that point. So, and it's okay. I always promise myself, when my tears and grief hit, I acknowledge them and take them where they are.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that at his funeral, the pastor who conducted his sermon said God was standing next to him, whispering in his ear, don't do it. And so God didn't take his life. God gives us free will. And so as a result, then, I have leaned into God and my relationship and my faith. That's been a huge piece. And I know that those who lose a child or experience death can go from one extreme to the next. They can hate God and have anger to God, and why didn't they prevent it? And I could have been thinking that. Or that they may suddenly go, I don't have any other resources. God is it. I was kind of in between. And my faith has deepened, my relationship with God has deepened to give me more strength. And I also believe in between Connor's passing and God, that's why I'm here. This has been a dream, a mission that's been placed on me by God to help others.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for just being transparent and true to you and your emotions as they've come up. As far as, I know that you focus on women and child loss, but I know that there's so many people. What's interesting is I've been listening to this audiobook. I'm gonna look it up so I can remember it, but it's by a popular author, but she spoke to her, she's been exposed to a lot of death in her life, and her husband, on the other hand, hasn't. So like they went to a funeral, and he's like, I think this is like my second, maybe third funeral of I've ever experienced. And she's
Wow.
like, what? And it's Rachel Hollis, and she has
Mm.
a book called Didn't See That Coming. And she put that out this year for COVID. But she's like, I've been to over 50 plus funerals in her lifetime. Like, it's just amazing, the gap and the variance of experiences and how you perceive death and how you handle death. And you know, her brother had committed suicide when she was 14. I believe she was 14, and she walked in and found her older brother. And I recently heard her sharing that story in detail, and hearing the grief and what you hear from other people. And so where I'm trying to go with this is that because I haven't experienced a lot of death, my closest relative that died was my grandmother, and I was very, very close with her. But I was 17, and so I just shut off to life, and I just pretended like she didn't exist. And then I had to mourn many years later as I dealt with that underlying pain that I had always suppressed. But how do you communicate and speak to someone and support them when they're dealing with a loss like of a child, and not feel like you're like saying the same thing everybody else is saying, or just, you know, what do you recommend, or what's your experience of what felt good for you, or what you've heard people appreciated versus maybe it didn't sit well with them?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to acknowledge this whole mourning process. Here in the United States, I just personally believe that we don't take the time to mourn, to recognize our emotions, give ourselves credit for grief. I mean, for death, it's life and death, it's inevitable. And I think that we just have a tendency to have expectations that people get over their loss. And that applies to a sibling, to a child, to a parent, to a spouse. It's that we just don't, this tradition of knowing how to grieve. I'm not Jewish, so if I don't get this right, but sitting in Shiva is, I guess, is one of those things where they actually take that time to acknowledge the loss, recognize, remember the deceased person, and that gives them that time. So it's a little bit more of a formal thing for them to experiencing that. I don't think, from my own experience, I've really seen any other tradition where people have done that. And so I just drew a blank. The other part of that question,
I was
what
wondering.
to say and what people have said. Yeah. And so what I have found, Alyssa, is, and this comes from both perspective as a grief coach and as a person who's received condolences. I'm sorry for your loss. That's a pretty generic one, where people say that, or prayers. And I think some people say it because they think it's the correct thing to say. And I guess I can't question whether it's genuine or not, and if they actually say any sort of prayer for my, healing in my journey. But some of the things that resonate more is if you've known them, hey, I knew Connor. Connor was a great guy. This is what I did with him. Share a story. Or if you don't know them, even say, Alyssa, you could say to me, I've talked about Connor and he was a skateboarder, and you could come back and say, because he was such a great skateboarder, I would have loved to have seen him skateboard, and to be able to say, I bet he was a great guy. Or Courtney's smile was contagious, and oh, I bet you that made your heart sing. So speaking their name and their experiences, because I think with child loss, not I think, I know, it becomes the elephant in the room. And with my first child, with Courtney, her dad didn't speak of her. And other people couldn't speak of her because then the 3 other children didn't know of her. So it was I that brought that to them many years later, but I had to bring that out. So speaking about them, being open to them. And then one of the worst things to say is that somebody should be over their loss. We don't, and that comes out, because somebody may be experiencing continued grief and emotions and heartbreak. And grief is on its own time. I must say there's normal grieving or healthy grieving, I guess, where we can eventually come out and function. You can get to the point where your grief interferes with your life, and that's when I suggest that you seek high levels of help. Other things is to even offer and bring a meal. Just bring it. And with COVID nowadays, that's so hard. So you may even just say, hey, you know what? What's your favorite meal? Okay, find out what it is, prepare it, take it over, do a doorbell, ring and run, call them and say it's there. Or even calling and checking on them. And when you say, how are you? How are you doing today in this moment? I had a friend who I would call on the phone, and she was my cry friend. And that's all I needed to do was cry. And then after she'd listened to me patiently, she'd finally go, now how you doing? You feeling better? And she'd wind up cracking jokes and I would laugh. But she was that go-to person. And so I knew I could count on her for that.
Yeah.
Take them to coffee, take coffee to them, or even just go sit and be silent. Hug them, hold their hands. So these are, and coming from your heart with compassion and understanding, and do other things like mow their lawn, do their dishes, clean their house, just things, because sometimes in your grief, you're incapacitated, that you can't do anything.
Yeah.
Offer to take care of other children, young children, if it need be. So those are a variety of things that you can do, and just checking on with them. I had a friend of mine after Courtney passed. Once a month, I received a card from her, just an inspirational card. Hey, checking about you. It's a flower. I'm thinking about you. And I tell you, that was a surprise. And after about 6 months, I was like, I wonder how long this is going to go on. But that was just something that was really very helpful to know that somebody still continued to care about me. Because so many times when the funeral's over and out of town guests have gone home, you're on your own. You feel like you've been dropped. And so I personally don't send out condolences cards immediately. I usually send them out 3 to 4 weeks, because that's when the grief really starts to sit and people have to start to figure things out.
Yeah. Wow. What I loved about everything you shared is it gives me insight, because I have a friend who recently lost his mother. And so I was talking with him this weekend, but I felt stuck in like the conversation. But one of the things that it sounded like, and I can attest to it, especially associated with my grandmother, like keeping their spirit alive, keeping the memory of them alive by sharing stories, by encouraging to hear stuff, and just remembering components of them that we appreciated and we loved. But then also, like, different personalities want to support someone in different ways. And so if you're not a real touchy-feely person where you want to go sit and hold their hand or a hug and give coffee and like go deep with them, or whatever it may be, sending a card once a month, like that is such a great idea. And even waiting until, after some time has passed, and things are kind of settling down. I just love that there's so many ways that, it doesn't matter what type of personality you are, there's a way that you can give. If you love to cook a meal and drop it off and ring the doorbell and leave. And like, there's so many ways that you can make an impact in a positive way for someone, no matter what loss has come up for them. And I appreciate the insight on that, because I know that I just get, I think depending on the person, I get a little uncomfortable with how, how I'm going to approach it. So it's nice to have some variation there. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask about, with COVID and just so many people, losing loved ones, whether that's, a grandparent and even beyond COVID, right? It just feels like death is more present right now with COVID and the news, but, friends, children, spouses, what are some specific strategies that you would recommend to just, as things have settled down and you're kind of sitting in it, to just be able to show up and begin to take action and pursue your life when you feel like you're completely numb and shut off from the world? Is there just one or two things that, of all the things that you ever tried, you're journaling, finding a tribe, getting in exercise, what would you recommend that if I'm stuck and laying in bed and I just can't function, how I might be able to move just an inch?
Well, you mentioned the journaling, and one of the things I think to be aware of where you are in your grief, and evaluate if you think whether or not you're slipping into a depression, because depression is not normal from grief, but it's normal to cry and be sad and possibly to have some anger. But when you become incapacitated, so I think that is really a good self-check to see where you are falling with that. I think that's really important. And then some of the other things is to have that mindset and decide what you want to do, in that there is possibilities after loss, whether it's a child loss or, the parent, the grandparent, but understand that there's possibilities. And so, some of the things that I've done is I have vision for things that I want beyond my loss, but there's things that I do to get me there. There's my grief survival program is dynamic, that you may do one thing and then come back and do another and tap into it here. So processing those thoughts, journaling. I love exercise, and it can be something as simple as yoga or meditation or walking around the block. Those are the things that are so impactful. And then evaluate, okay, ask yourself, really, where would you be in 6 months or 12 months? I mean, there's no time frame. I mean, once you've lost somebody, you've always lost them. But stepping into that new normal and being able to accept that this is what it is. There's a loose quote here from Oprah Winfrey, radical acceptance, and to be able to accept that things will not change and you cannot go back. I think that's huge in being able to accept that it is what it is.
Yeah. You know what you said that I was like, it was like an aha, is that depression is not normal in grief.
It's not.
My first thought is that's what happens when someone dies and you're really sad, you just become depressed. And to hear that, it's like, oh my gosh, like, so if at the very least, if I can just be aware of where I'm at mentally to protect myself from going farther down a rabbit hole of pain, that depression is not normal. And that's a sign that something has to change. But in journaling, or just somehow you're maintaining this degree of awareness of how far you are in your pain, and indicate it, like, So can you tell me, like, with your grief survival program, if I just experienced a death, do you recommend it's something I go to right away, or do I wait, a month after things have settled and I then am in more pain? Like, when do you recommend that we, implement your program and things like that?
And that's a great question. My program has several steps out of it, and some of them I don't directly deal with helping somebody to plan a funeral service or whatever, but it picks up shortly after that.
Okay.
And doing some journaling and then developing that tribe, finding those people that you can count on, and then when you call 6 months later and you just want to cry, that they're there for you, or you need to speak your child's name. And I give the option for people to develop their higher power. My higher power is God. And so, like I said, it ebb and flows. But then I also offer in there, how do you deal with their possessions? That's always a tough question. Or creating a memorial. And your health is such a big piece. And then even looking at things down the road for you. For the memorial, just for an example, we purchased, my girls and I, a living urn for my son. And what that is, he was cremated, some ashes, and then when the timing is right, I'll get a sapling tree and have it planted.
Oh, wow.
But we struggled with where to plant this because I live in a condo and I don't have any place to put it. We were going to put it in a national forest, but then it would be a place we wouldn't visit. Who knows if it, the deer would eat it or whatever.
Right.
So we had to come up with plan B. And I mentioned he was a skateboarder, so we were able to plant a tree at the park, but it wasn't the tiny sapling because that wasn't their rules. I bought a tree that was, about that big in diameter, and we had that planted. And then to further, in his honor and in his memory, we had a memorial rock placed at the base of the tree. But that took 2 years for us to really hone in on what we wanted. And so, in helping people what their thoughts are, and there's no rush in doing anything. And after that was completed just about a month ago, we had a dedication and brought together his friends and family again.
Wow.
And so you can start with this program at any time. It covers the gamut. And that can be whether you've just started and you're lost and don't know where to go, possibly that you have hope of doing more and you have passion, and now you go, what do I do with this? I still need to deal with this mess. Or if you're somewhere in between and just not sure what you want to do.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. I love that you've created that space because you know everything that's needed, from recognizing you just need support, recognizing you and you just showing that there's not like this time frame. And in my head, there's so many components you're saying that it sounds silly, but I'm like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, you don't put a time frame on it. Like, you don't just, okay, this happened this day, and in 6 months you're here, and then in 1 year you're here. Like, this is not, it's same with personal transformation. I don't know why in death though, because I've experienced so little of it. I just feel like I have this disconnect of timeline. But there's not. Like, healing comes at any pace, that you have no place to judge someone for where they are in their progression of that healing. But just recognizing that if they get to this deeper state of what is depression, then that is something that has to really be addressed. And recognizing that, you have this vision to memorialize someone, but it's not to say that it's going to all of a sudden come to fruition in, the time frame that you might think, but that be true to you, and explore that with your family and loved ones. And, just finding people and recognizing the value of having, people who have a loss. And I thought about, as you were talking about having someone to call and a community to go to, I know of one woman who lost her husband to a heart attack unexpectedly. and she and her children, they have a community of people that they go to that can relate. And I remember her posting things, so I can see that and they talked about being so excited, and with COVID that being shut down, and so I could see how the value in that. Now with your online community and your Thursday motivation and just thoughts and things like that, is that a space where, if I have a feeling or a question, or what are you sharing there that I can maybe connect with, or even maybe post that you could share some insight on? Is that a space that you do that?
Yeah, so my Thursday Thoughts is a weekly email that I send out, and it's just on a variety of topics and subjects. And so many times it's what I'm personally experiencing, because I think that is so applicable and relatable when I have a bad day, or a hurdle that I've overcome. So by my story sharing, that I'm able to demonstrate, hey, this is how you can use this technique, this tool, these thoughts, these ideas. And so if you're interested in receiving those, you can sign up for that on my website. And my website is The Grief Specialist, and there's 2 E's in it. And the purpose behind the 2 E's is because I am the one. I've been through it. So I'm the grief specialist. So it's thegriefspecialist.com, and you can sign up for my Thursday Thoughts on that. And then my Facebook business page also is The Grief Specialist, where I post some other thoughts and provoke questions. And that is a forum where people can ask questions, or they can reach out directly to me as well, which is a really good way to do that. So yeah, there are those ways that you can reach out to me. And I would say that the Facebook page is, because there's more of just grieving moms that are on that. A little bit of a safe
it seems very
place.
robust. I've been to it, and it seems very robust with just information and a space to connect. And
Yes.
your grief survival program, are you running that now, or is that kind of a continuous thing that, regardless of what time of year it is, that I can reach out and participate in that?
Yeah, Alyssa, that's wonderful. So yeah, my grief survival program is some one-on-one coaching, and where we get that opportunity to work together, interact. I get to know you, what your struggles are, and I can give you direct resources to be able to understand how to be able to get to those. So yeah, that's the grief survival program. And you can schedule a breakthrough session again on my website. And it's just up to date, and it's an opportunity to really, I want to hear your story, get to know you, where you're coming from, where you might want to go, and address some opportunities to really help you to move through your grief, not get over it, but to be able to navigate it. And then we'll decide, hey, is it right for you? Is it appropriate? Is the time right to be able to work together? It's on my heart, my passion to help you grieving moms make it through this time, because I know the tools and resources I accumulated are 100% responsible that I'm here today. And what's really exciting is that you can know that there's possibilities, what the possibilities look like after child loss, because I am that living example.
Yeah. I cannot thank you enough, Peggy, for so many things. One, just the awareness that I just feel to a degree I'm disconnected when it comes to death, and how to connect with people and support them, and just the awareness of that grieving process, that it's not normal to be depressed, and just the tools and strategies that you've provided, what you've overcome, and your openness to share your story and to help women transform through that grief and evolve in a healthy way. I mean, I'm just so grateful that you've created a space and you've taken your experiences and you're giving back. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared today and your openness and authenticity and all the strategies that you've supported us in learning. Thank you.
Well, Alyssa, it's been my pleasure, my honor. And like I said, it's my hope that it reaches somebody who needs to hear this message, whether it be today, 6 months, or 6 years down the road.